In this edition of the News Review, the leader of the Palestinian resistance movement Hamas says all Palestinians are in unison in condemning and rejecting the U.S. proposed deal of the century. Yahya Sinwar called on all Muslim nations, especially regional Arab states, to stand against the U.S.-backed deal and not abandon the Palestinian cause. Sinwar hailed Iran and Qatar for their support of the Palestinians. He also condemned the upcoming Bahrain conference, where the economic aspects of the deal are set to be unveiled at the end of this month. He said Palestinian leaders feel disappointed as some Arab leaders are moving towards normalization of ties with Israel. Palestinian factions have already rejected the so-called peace plan, saying it is doomed to failure. To discuss that further, we're joined by Mr. Richard Silverstein, journalist and political commentator, joining us live from Seattle, and also Mr. Saib Shaath, author and Middle East affairs expert, joining us live from Belfast. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Let's start with Mr. Silverstein. How exactly do you think the United States is planning to unfold this deal of the century, the economic aspects of it? What can we expect to happen? And of course, we do know that the U.S. has based all of this on the premise that it did not receive as harsh of a reaction as it expected when it moved its embassy to Jerusalem, Al-Quds.
Well, I think there are 2 points to make here. First is that Jared Kushner yesterday did a major TV interview. He almost never is interviewed. And in the interview, he made some astonishing statements that it's worth your listeners knowing about. He said when he was asked whether the Palestinians trusted him, he said, quote unquote, "I'm not out to be trusted." In other words, he doesn't care who trusts him. Of course, the Israelis trust him because it's an Israeli, it's a favorable deal for Israel. But the Palestinians don't trust him, and he doesn't. I'm tempted to use a stronger four-letter word, but I won't on air. He doesn't really care what the Palestinians think about him. The other thing he was asked was, did he feel that the Palestinians were governable? And he said, well, that's an open question. I don't think we can answer that at this time. So he's really disparaging the Palestinians. He's smearing them. He's showing complete and utter disregard and disdain for the Palestinians. And why he thinks this deal has any chance of resonating anywhere outside of the Trump administration and Jerusalem is well beyond me. There's just absolutely no chance for this deal going anywhere. And I should add that Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, had a meeting with the leaders of American Jewish organizations, and he admitted to them, he used the term, the deal is probably not executable. That means that he doesn't think that the administration can execute this deal, which is obvious to anyone with two eyes in their head, that the deal is dead. But the fact that the Secretary of State admitted to Jewish leaders that it is dead, and that this was revealed publicly yesterday in the media is simply astonishing. I've never seen anything like this in terms of Middle East negotiation for any previous U.S. administration.
Thank you very much. Let's turn to Mr. Saib Shaath. What about the Palestinian reaction? Well, we do know that they have boycotted this meeting, and we do understand that, unfortunately, we have two major Arab countries, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, that are sending ministerial-level delegations to this meeting. Although it was encouraging to hear from Saudi Arabia in the recent summit held in Mecca that they do consider East Jerusalem Al-Quds as a capital for a Palestinian state. So how far do you think the deal of the century can go, considering this side of the equation?
The deal of the century, to start with, was focused on components which to do with the three countries, apart from the Zionist entity. Egypt on part of Sinai to be annexed to, so the Gaza can expand and from Arish to the Gaza border. and part of from Saudi Arabia to be given to the Jordanians, and the Palestinians to be pushed out of the West Bank in the future, and to settle in Jordan as a homeland for the Palestinians, and to a real estate kind of business. He thinks he's buying and selling blocks in New York, Kushner or Trump, and to have that area as booming in business and in trade, and open digger tunnel between Egypt and Saudi Arabia. That's part of the American kind of thinking. And to be more cynical in here, the American media revealed today that they believe the whole idea of the deal of the century actually is the thought and it came up with Mohammed bin Zayed, the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi. He is the one who had this plan, and he presented it to Trump, and he's the one who encouraged Trump to back Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia today, Mohammed bin Salman. And he says to him, if you like me, he is going to be exactly the same. So they can execute the American design in the region. So we can understand that. Today as well, part of it, when you hear Sinwar and all of them feel betrayed by the Arabs, when he hailed repeatedly Iran and Qatar. As well, they said Israel modified the F-16 fighter jets made by United States of America and for the United Arab Emirates, and sell them again to it. And they trained the pilots of the United Arab Emirates. And we had before so many game wars and training happening between what they would love to call themselves Little Sparta, United Arab Emirates, in Greece with the Israeli army. So there is alliance in there, is in the open. And those guys don't, because when you look at it, you look at Trump, who is only in real estate. Abu Dhabi and Dubai, it's a new 1970 being manufactured as a state. There is no heritage, there is no history in there. As well, the same in Riyadh. There is no heritage, there is no real sense of value for history and religion and culture, which vibrate all over Palestine. And they want to bribe the Palestinian people through the first component, the economical component of the Trump's deal of this century in Bahrain conference, telling the Palestinians, you're going to be prosperous in what we propose to you. The Palestinian, I repeat, they heard this before when they sold them the Oslo Agreement, and they told them Gaza and the West Bank going to be prosperous as Singapore.
I'm very sorry to cut you off. I need to ask Mr. Silverstein a final question. We're running out of time. Mr. Silverstein, as Mr. Shaath has mentioned, it seems that they're going to try to bribe Palestinians into accepting this deal of the century. What are you expecting, if you could please summarize it in as many few words as you can, what are you expecting to come out of this summit in Bahrain?
American administrations over the last several terms have decided that it would be easier to turn the Palestinian issue into an economic one and to omit the political dimension. And that's a fatal failure. And Trump has really taken this to the greatest extreme by basically completely eliminating any political element to this solution. So no Palestinian and no Arab or Muslim is going to agree to sell their birthright for a mess of porridge, as the Bible says, or for 30 pieces of silver, as the Christian tradition says. It's not up for sale. Political rights are paramount. If you can solve the issue of political rights, then the economic issues will follow and are secondary. The other thing I want to mention is that Saudi Arabia, in the Makkah meeting that they had, even though they did endorse the Palestinian cause, I think we have to recognize that the Sunni states of Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states and Egypt have basically abandoned the Palestinian cause, and they're now paying lip service to it. As you mentioned, I think earlier, their primary allegiance now is to developing a relationship with Israel, and seeing Iran as the existential threat to all of them, given that they're basically tyrants and autocrats. And so we have to face this future in which the Sunni part of the Muslim spectrum is going to abandon Palestine, and the only Muslim group or faction that is going to continue to advocate for Palestine seems to be the Shia world in Islam.
Thank you very much, Mr. Silverstein. Now, Mr. Shaath, with your final thoughts, please, if you could wrap it up in just a few words.
Okay, the Palestinians are committed more than ever for the struggle against Zionist entity. The Palestinians today, they are using all means to fight Zionism. They developed from the rocks to the rockets today, precisely target rockets. Take Gaza for an example. They liberated Gaza in 2005, albeit the Zionist entity besieging and blockading Gaza since that victory. But this, the Palestinians in Gaza and in Lebanon, especially in South Lebanon, are putting the Zionist and the American project of domination in the region into reverse. They are losing, and the resistance in there are winning.
Thank you very much. Now, that was Mr. Shaath, author and Middle East affairs expert, joining us live from Belfast, and Mr. Richard Silverstein, journalist and political commentator. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on this edition of the News Review, and thanks to all of our viewers for following this edition with us.